All right, hey nerds. So, I'm going to talk about Destiny, debating with Alex. Well, not really debating, but talking with Alex O'Connor about ethics based on evidence and data, that sort of idea. Of course, Destiny, a lot of people know, is a political streamer. And Alex O'Connor, British philosophy YouTuber, I've talked about many times before. And yeah, they get into this idea about whether people aren't consistent on their ethical principles and whether they act on their moral principles, and whether people respond to evidence or data and change their positions based on that, which is obviously it is obviously always relevant to discussions and debates about anything. So let's get into it.
If there are four people standing in a circle and three people are saying, I think that the earth is round, and another guy saying, I think the earth is flat, we can run a battery of tests. We can take in all the sense data, and eventually our minds can come to some agreement because of our ability to interact with the external world and say, well, look, actually, we are correct, right? And the world is spherical. And the fourth guy, you were just wrong. You can think what you want, but you're wrong. However, if four people were to stand in a circle and three were to say murder is wrong. And
I would also add, like, for my main take, in terms of my main takeaway for this, will that fourth guy still believe that the earth is flat, even if presented with a whole bunch of data, a battery of tests, evidence, and data to the contrary? Will the flat earth person just believe that all this evidence and data is a government conspiracy and it's not really true and it's just a whole cover up of the fact that the world is flat?
The other guy say, well, I think murder is okay. It feels like there's no possible thing that you could appeal to or look at or ever have a discussion about to resolve that disagreement. I don't know how you would do it.
If you got
However, if four people were to stand in a circle and three were to say murder is wrong, and the other guy say, well, I think murder is okay, it feels like there's no possible thing that you could appeal to or look at or ever have a discussion about to resolve that disagreement. I don't know how you would do it.
If you got four people in a room and they all agree that sense data is accurate, but one thinks the earth is flat, then yes, based on that fundamental agreement that sense data is accurate, you could draw a consistency test. But if those four people in the room, if one of them doesn't believe that the external world exists at all and believes that they're just a brain in a vat, there is no test you can run. You said there's a battery of tests you can run. There's not one test you could run to disprove that.
If there are four people standing...
I think you could basically apply that sort of conclusion to all three of their analogies that they use there. So if there are four people and three agree that the earth is round and the fourth agree that and the fourth thinks that the earth is flat, then is that fourth person going to be convinced by evidence and data? Some people are. I think most people are not. And I really think it depends on the issue for the person. People do not actually act based on their principles. They act based on whether their principles comply with their desires most of the time. You can do that more, but it's hard to do, and most people don't. So anyway, I think that, unfortunately, most people in most of those situations, if you ran that test over and over again, and most results, the fourth guy would still think that the earth is flat. And similarly, the fourth guy, in terms of the four people in the second example, three of whom believe that murder is wrong and the fourth of whom believe that murder is right, will the fourth guy actually change his opinion if the other three people present him with all kinds of data that show that murder is right? I mean, can you even prove with evidence and data the principle that murder is morally right or wrong? I don't really think you can. That doesn't mean that you have to be a moral relativist. But again, people really strongly believe and identify with their morally held beliefs, right? And then again, similarly, if you have four people in a room and three of them agree that that they exist, everyone else exists, and reality exists, and the fourth one doesn't believe that reality or other people exist, and they present him with a whole battery of tests filled with evidence and data that conclusively prove that it's at least phenomenally likely that you exist and other people exist and reality exists. But will that person actually believe the evidence and data that they are shown that supposedly proves that they exist, other people exist, and reality exists? Or will that first person be completely unable to be convinced by any evidence and data that they themselves, everyone else, and reality as a whole actually exist? I mean, you could convince some people, but it really depends on the person and their mental state and how strongly they identify with their opinions and how they act according to their principles. People are really complex, and we don't act the way we think we do. We can try to act more rationally, but we don't really. And we all are phenomenally biased in our opinions. So yeah, I think that some people would change their opinions based on evidence and data, but it really depends on the issue and how strongly you identify with that ethical principle and with that particular issue. So yeah, I think unfortunately for the most part, if you, in all three of those examples, the fourth person would most likely not be convinced by evidence or data, even especially more moral or ethical principles, not just that whether the earth is round or flat, but whether murder is right or wrong and whether reality exists or not, especially whether murder is right or wrong. That's the most clearly ethical principle, that it doesn't have to do with other factors as much, right? So yeah, anyway, I don't think that most people are convinced and by evidence and data and change their ethical principles based on evidence and data. Yeah, people don't change their minds based on evidence and data.